You're listening to the Sales for the Nigerian Wedding Industry podcast, and I'm your host, Abuja based event photographer Tabeshima Ayede. Now, during the last episode, we spoke about money management tips, and if you remember, uh, they they came about because of the conversations that I've been having with my mentee, who is an undergraduate student at the University of Aberdeen, which is my alma mater, or rather one of my alma matters. I'm not sure what the plural of alma mater is. Anyway, the study material that we've been going over with my mentee has been from the Sell the Couch podcast. And the reason why I've been using that is because it's a podcast aimed for mental health professionals. And my mentee is currently undergoing a psychology degree. I think she's a third year student, if I remember correctly. And the Sell the Couch podcast is a podcast that has a sales bent but leans towards mental health professionals. Now, if you remember in the last episode, the reason why I said it was okay to refer to outside material was because a multidisciplinary approach helps when you're trying to improve your sales and try to improve your personal selling skills. In my own case, my undergraduate degree was in the law, and I have been able to take a lot from that, from the legal background into personal selling. The whole idea of client consultations, and also the case management structure that we use in the law. That's for those of you who also come from similar backgrounds as I do. We have a case management system built on managing your diary entries and the calendar. So these have come in really useful in learning, in organizing my sales process. So it's not it's not out of the ordinary, or it's not a bad thing that on a podcast that is aimed for wedding professionals that I'm making reference to another podcast which is aimed at medical health professionals. Now, for this episode, I'm going to freestyle a little bit on thoughts on building a sales funnel and email lists. Now, for those of you who've been following the podcast from the beginning, you remember that I said the reason for the podcast is because I think that personal sales as a tool for building your business is something that has been underutilized for most people. So it would seem like an anti-thesis to now start discussing building sales funnels and stuff like that on a podcast built that is built on the idea of personal selling. But the reason why I think it's something we ought to look at is because, if you remember correctly, I said in the first episode that that personal selling isn't the only foot on which our business is going to be built successfully. I just think it's a tool that is underutilized. So even though I'm an advocate of personal selling, I believe that we should also still pay attention to these sorts of things, like building sales funnels, email lists, and worry about things like conversion rates and all of that. Now, this was also as a result of the conversations with my mentee, and the study material that we used was episode 208 of the Sell the Couch podcast. Okay, now what's the relationship between emailing and personal sales? That's a fundamental assumption that I'd like us to question, because I'm assuming that there is indeed a relationship. Now, there's a relationship because email can be a personal sales tool. If you remember in my early episodes, I said that even though the focus of personal sales is when you're face to face with your client or your prospect or your customer, but it also, a lot has to be said about the tone that you use in whatever communications channel that you pick. So you can use the phone and it will still be personal sales. You can use email and it will still be personal sales. It all depends on the tone and the manner that you use. So if you're going to be like most marketers or most business people who just blast out template emails, then in that case that is not personal sales. But if at some point in your cadence you send out mass market emails But then when people get in touch, you now step things down and take a more personal approach and try to um, push the deal along using the email, then that particular aspect is personal sales. So there is a relationship between emailing and personal sales. Now, apart from that, all the principles that we're going to learn in personal selling can help inform your email cadence and make it more relatable and make it more personal. Okay. Okay. So yes, there's a relationship between emailing and personal sales because email is also a personal sales tool. Personal selling can help you inform and shape your email cadence. And with the tips and tricks that we learn from personal selling, you're going to be able to make your email focus and tone more personal and more effective. Now, as to the matter of how to build a sales funnel or an email list, I have no expertise in that matter at all. And that's precisely the reason why I referred the podcast to my mentee so that she can learn directly from the pros because my bias is towards personal selling. Now, even though I don't have any, um, even though I don't have any expert opinion on the matter, I do have a few things to say. Excuse me. I do have a few things to say when it comes to tips and tricks about how to use email in promoting your business. So my number one tip for today would be to listen to podcasts like the Selling the Couch podcast. There are also other podcasts out there that are aimed towards marketing and branding and things of that nature. So listen to podcasts like that for the technical aspects of how to build email funnels because you're not going to learn that here. Also, the second tip is when using email, keep your responses prompt and short. By prompt, I mean respond on time because nothing sucks as much as um, you sending out your cadence, people get in touch, and then you take maybe a week or two to get back to them. Um, those delays when it comes to following up or following through are some of the ways that we lose deals in our deal flow. So keep them prompt. Now the reason why emails have to be short is because a lot of people read emails on their phones and not necessarily on the desktop anymore. Apart from that, modern email culture or modern reading culture is now built around the whole the skill of skimming. So a lot of people skim through their emails, they don't read. So keep it short so that people can skim through and still effectively get what the gist of your email was. That way they will know what else to do as a follow on from your email. Now, this tip is the next tip is something that is particularly useful and is derived from the discipline of personal selling. Use a question-driven approach when you're sending out your emails. That way, you're going to ensure that the other person replies. Typically, we blast out emails without um, any concern about whether we get people to reply to them or not, because the main thing we should be focused on when sending out an email is to get some sort of response. Because if we send an email and there's no response, it gets ignored, then we're left high and dry. So if you use a question-driven approach in your email, there's something to respond to when the other person opens it up on the other end. And of course, related to that is to use call to actions in your email to make sure that you advance the sale. Now, I'm going to take some time out to define some terms that I've used so far in this podcast. One word that I've used is cadence. Now, I'm not going to define it in an academic sense. Any definition that I use in this episode or in future episodes are going to be working definitions. Now, the working definition of cadence, in my own opinion, is your is the flow that you have to the communication, whatever communication it is that you're using. So, in my own example, if you listen to I think the second or maybe the third episode, after my bridal expo, I attended the bridal expo. I met up with clients. That's the first part in my cadence. Using that particular example, after that, I send out the invoice the next day. That's another step with the cadence, and then there's a follow-up call in about a week's time. So basically, that's what a cadence means. That's what a cadence is. It's how you stagger your communications touches with your clients. Apologies for the noise from the background. In the estate that I live at, there's a mosque, and so they do these call to prayers and things like that. Well, anyway, it's not something that I can avoid now since we're all working from home and I'm forced to record these podcasts at unusual hours. Okay, now back to where I was. So the second term that I would like to define is advance the sale. I said you should use a question-driven approach when sending out your email, and also use call to actions at the end of your emails to make sure that you advance the sale. Now, for those of you who haven't done any sales training at all, you might not have realized that there's a distinction between, there's a difference in when you meet up with a client and you guys stand up from the table to leave, or when you're done with the email. There's a difference between both of you standing up and leaving without having a clear sense of what it is that you're going to do next, and when both of you stand up and each of you have a clear indication of what we're going to do afterwards. Now, the distinction comes from the distinction between an advancement and a continuation comes from, I think the fellow's name is Neil Rackham. It's from an old book called Spin Selling. I think something that was written in the 80s or maybe the early 90s. I can't remember. I'll cross check in future episodes. So when you have an advancement, that means you and your customer or your prospect have a clear idea of what the next step is. That helps to move the sale forward. A continuation is when both of you stand up from the table, or you come away from the email and neither of you has a clear idea of what to do next. The sale seems to continue along, but you don't know if it's a yes or if it's a no, or if you're making progress. You should always be aiming for advances in the sale rather than having continuations. Now, given the example with the cadence that I used earlier, at the bridal fair, I meet up with the couple, they leave, and we both know that the next clear step is to send the invoice. So that way, there's an advancement in the sale. We're both clear about what it is that we're going to do next. And then after I send off the invoice, there's the message or the phone call, and then they know that I'm calling them back in X number of days or in a week's time, so that we can go over the invoice to be sure that everything is everything meets their expectations. And well, I'm not going to go into detail about what my cadence is now. I'll reserve that for future episodes. But basically, that's the main idea. When you're at a point in communication, you have to be absolutely sure that whatever it is, you guys are leaving the table or you're done with the email or the phone call, you should be clear on what the next step is going to be. And this is the thought process that you should also take to your emails as well. Use questions to ensure that the other person replies, and then have agreed calls to action so that you guys know what the next step is, and that way you advance the sale. So that's it all for today. So please remember to follow, to subscribe, and to share from iTunes, Stitcher, Google, SoundCloud, Overcast, or whatever podcast catcher that you use. And also, don't forget to follow or DM on Instagram. I'm on Instagram at Ayede_photography. Ayede is spelled A for Alpha, Y for Yankee, B for Echo, D for Delta, E for Echo. That is AYEDE_photography. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you guys, or rather, I guess it's fine to say that. I'll see you guys on the next episode.